Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order when you check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Sports Pictorium Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. If he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL helmet poster. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
On Halloween night, 1959, in front of a packed house at LSU, Billy Cannon fielded a punt on his own 11 in the fourth quarter, just outside the right numbers, and immediately broke through a first tackle. He stumbled, busted through a second tackle, then a third at the 25, deked the opposition at the 35, got loose from another would-be tackler at the 45, and then ran down the right sideline to complete an incredible 89-yard punt return for a touchdown to lead LSU to a 7-3 victory over rival Ole Miss. It was perhaps the greatest punt return in the history of LSU football. In fact, that punt return is played on the big screen at LSU every time Ole Miss comes to town and is just part of the legend of Billy Cannon. Now, part 2 of Billy Cannon on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. Hey, if you want to see a clip of that run, I have a link to it at sportsfh.com. That's sportsfh.com. And if you would like to learn more on how you can participate in a future podcast of Sports Forgotten Heroes, please check out our page on patreon.com/sportsfh. That's patreon.com/sportsfh. You can learn more on how you can participate and ask questions of our guests, like today's guest, Charles deGravelles, who wrote the great book, Billy Cannon, A Long, Long Run, or from the sportshistorian.com, Jim Weathersby. You know, Billy Cannon enjoyed a spectacular career at LSU, won a Heisman Trophy and a national championship, and ultimately became the number 1 pick in the NFL draft by Pete Rozelle and the Los Angeles Rams. But the upstart AFL, along with Bud Adams, the owner of the Houston Oilers, also wanted Billy Cannon, and they offered him an incredible contract. So the battle for his services was just beginning. And here to tell us more about that battle from the sportshistorian.com is Jim Weathersby.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. The first contract that he signed was at the end of 1959 in November. He was up in New York with fellow All-Americans being feted and being on the Ed Sullivan Show. And you're right, Pete Rozelle, then general manager of the Rams had the first pick that year in the NFL draft, and they wanted Billy. And basically Rozelle was able to coerce Billy to take a train from New York to Philadelphia and to sign a contract, which was, pretty good for the time. The Rams basically offered him $30,000 for 3 years plus the $10,000 signing bonus and $500 expenses for basically a short train ride from New York to Philadelphia. And Billy signed the contract. And interestingly, at the end of the Sugar Bowl there in January 1960, at the end of the game, the Oilers came out, offered him a contract right there in one of the end zones, and Billy signed that not knowing what the terms were. And so later on, he went back to Baton Rouge and decided that, you know what, I should honor this NFL contract. And basically told the Oilers that, look, I can't play for you. But Bud Adams, like you said, and the owner of the Houston Oilers, from the New American Football League, he basically wouldn't take no for an answer, and used Billy's friend Alvin Roy, who got Billy into weightlifting, to convince Billy to listen to what Bud Adams had to say. So Bud went down to Baton Rouge, offered Billy more money that he could dream of, a contract of $33,000 a year for 3 years, $33,000 a year each for 3 years, guaranteed, plus a $10,000 signing bonus and a $500 expense check, basically. But the Rams had offered it from that standpoint. So that was a hell of a lot of money, and Billy was, thinking about it. And ever the business person, he negotiated with Bud Adams at a Cadillac Fleetwood for Billy's father, and got that as part of the deal too. Well, Bud Adams wasn't stupid. He realized that the NFL wasn't just going to roll over, and he told Billy, look, if the NFL tries to do something about this, and they probably will, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my lawyers defend you, and we're going to win this thing. And so you're right, the NFL sued, and they went to court, and the judge ruled basically that the NFL contract, which was three separate contracts, one for each year, he threw out the last 2 years immediately because he said that the contract had not been signed by the NFL commissioner and had not been filed properly. And he said that the first year, everything was proper, but he voided that year as well because he said Pete Rozelle negotiated with Billy without Billy having some kind of representation there to look out for his own interests. So the judge threw out the contract, the NFL contract, and the Oilers had Billy services, and I believe Bud Adams paid $37,000 to defend that his contract for Billy, and which in that day and age was a lot of money. But Billy became a Houston Oiler in the fledgling American Football League.
Like Weathersby said, Billy was property of the American Football League. The NFL lost its battle to gain his services. Here now is Charles deGravelles.
One of the many great ironies in Billy's story is that the judge decided that because Billy he had met with Pete Rozelle one-on-one to negotiate and sign the NFL contract, because he hadn't been represented by anyone, and because he was, I can't remember exactly the words, but he was an innocent country lad that had been taken advantage of. Billy was anything but he was willing to play along and win the higher contract. But the judge said he wasn't represented, therefore, and he was represented during the Bud Adams meeting in Baton Rouge. So that was the deciding factor.
He did put up some terrific numbers during those 11 years, though. 2,455 rushing yards, 3,656 receiving yards. He scored 64 touchdowns. 64 touchdowns is a lot of touchdowns. But in 1961, he had one heck of a game against the New York Titans, who later changed their name to the New York Jets. Do you recall that game? Can you tell me a little bit about that game?
That game was a spectacular win for Billy Cannon, but it was an outstanding game in an outstanding first couple of years. If he had not hurt his back in his second year of pro ball and had been able to continue running at the level that he was running at, his numbers would be a lot higher. And so he lost a little bit of his edge when Emil Karras came down on his back in a really difficult tackle, and they switched him from running back to tight end.
Right.
But he turned that position into
an offensive threat.
Catching. Yeah, and he continued to exercise that speed to get past the secondary, catch passes, and make touchdowns.
That game against the Titans, he had the most yards from scrimmage in a single non-overtime game, 330. He had 373 all-purpose yards, scored 5 touchdowns. He had 216 yards rushing. He was the league's MVP that year with 948 yards, and He was the championship game MVP for a second year in a row. He had quite the career with the Oilers. Yeah, he won the championship in 1960, was named the game's MVP, led the Oilers to the AFL championship again in 61, and for a second time, like I just said, was named the game's MVP. He did hurt his back in 62, as you alluded to, and after just 4 years with Houston, he moved on to Oakland. What was behind the move from Houston to Oakland?
Well, he was very dissatisfied with the coaching at Houston, and they changed coaches a number of times in a short period. He had personality issues with the coaching staff, and he was not unhappy when they offered to trade him. And when he got out to Oakland and began to play with the Raiders, he liked Al Davis very much, and he continued to play with them for, again, several years.
When Billy got to Oakland, and even though Al Davis liked him, it wasn't smooth sailing. As deGravelles said earlier, Billy had to change positions. He became a tight end. And although he didn't like the move at first, Billy converted the tight end position into a legitimate scoring threat. Here now is Jim Weathersby.
Oakland was slowly building its team into a formidable franchise, and it finally came to fruition in 1976 when they won their first Super Bowl. But going back to Billy's days, he started out as a fullback and revolutionized that position. Fullbacks are basically blockers for the other running backs, but Billy could catch passes, and once he caught them, he could do something with them because of his speed and elusiveness. So he started out at fullback, and a year or two later, old Al Davis convinced him to become a tight end. And again, at that point in time, tight ends were known mainly just as blocking pieces, and Billy revolutionized that position by having the ability to go down the field and catch 20, 30, 40-yard passes and turn them into touchdowns. So, wherever Billy went, things just seemed to turn to gold for him. And, he hung on with the Raiders into 1970, and his skills by that time were lacking, and the Raiders cut him, and he ended up getting picked up by the Kansas City Chiefs, coached by Hank Stram, and finished out his career in 1970 with the Chiefs. Late in the season, he had a bad knee injury, and that pretty much sealed the deal for him to move on to other things. But he, 11 years, he thrived in the American Football League, and I don't know how much better he could have been in the NFL. Yeah, he probably could have had more exposure, but really did some great things for the AFL. And like I said, the AFL eventually merged with the NFL and became the modern-day NFL that it is today.
His football career now over, Billy turned to something he had been working on during off-seasons. He became a dentist, and he built a rather large practice.
When he was a boy, growing up in the blue-collar neighborhood of North Baton Rouge called Estruma, there was a dentist in that part of town that just became Billy's role model. He was a very generous guy who helped a lot of indigent people and poor people who couldn't always afford the kind of work that he offered. And he would give barbecues for the football team, and was very active in his church, and was active in promoting the dental school and what have you. And this dentist became the person that Billy wanted to be. And so as much as he loved football, he, even as a young man, knew he wanted to be a dentist and wanted to be the kind of person that this fellow was.
And he went home to do it too, right? He didn't stay out in Oakland. He didn't go to Kansas City. He wasn't in Houston. He went back home. How important was being home to Billy?
Well, during his career, he earned his dental degree off season over a number of years at the University of Tennessee Dental School. And so when he wasn't playing in the spring, he was in school. And but he got his degree just about the time that he was finishing his professional career, and that's when he wanted to get a special certificate in orthodontics and went to Loyola in Chicago and finished there. But he knew he was always going to come back to Baton Rouge. That's where, he was so well known and so well loved. And so it's, when it was time to start his career, he was back in Baton Rouge.
And he built a pretty big practice. But despite the fact that his practice was so successful, he still had his hands in other places, particularly real estate and gambling. Not a good mix. What happened?
Well, he was not really an excessive gambler. He did love and does. He still owns thoroughbreds to race, and has raced his own horses for many years. But he has never, despite a lot of rumors to the contrary, he has never spent a lot of money gambling. But he did overextend himself in real estate in the market downturn in the late 70s and early 80s. It was a decline in the economy that was triggered by the fall in oil price. I'm sorry, the spike in oil prices, and Louisiana is an oil producing state.
Sure.
And but what it meant was that everything went up, including real estate, and he couldn't get rid of his real estate that he had spent a lot of money on, and he began to face a bear market. So he decided he was going to literally make money, and he got in bed with the guy who had been convicted of counterfeiting before, somebody who had been a boxer at LSU, a guy named John Stiglitz, and they came up with this scheme. And initially, Billy wasn't supposed to do anything but front the money, but in the end, Billy was holding just big giant duffel bags full of $100 bills in his orthodontics office, and it caught up with him.
How was he found out? How did it catch up with him?
Well, the guy, John Stiglitz, was very good at what he did. And when the first counterfeit bills started turning up, and they made it back to Washington, D.C. in the Office of the Secret Service, the head people at the Secret Service said, recognized the style, recognized the craftsmanship, and said, if you want to find the rest of these bills, find John Stiglitz. And so that was the beginning of the end. And so Billy was found out pretty early on. They really hadn't. He never did make any money out of the thing. But Secret Service rented a whole floor at a local hotel, and Billy began to recognize them as they followed him around. And he just knew the game was up. But until the day that they raided his house, he was playing the game that he didn't do it. But when they finally caught up with him, he fessed up.
And they found some buried in his yard, didn't they?
They found some buried out in a field, one of his real estate acquisitions, and they found some buried outside of his dental office.
Here's a guy who had such a great high school career, a great college career, followed that with a great pro career, a terrific dental practice. And one morning he wakes up in jail. I mean, that's got to be a tough pill to swallow.
I imagine, anybody with that kind of fame and success who land, whether he's a politician or an actor or somebody else, and ends up in jail, it's just a long, long way down. It's a long fall. And very, very humbling experience. And but one of the things that I so admire about him is that he didn't try to point fingers and blame anybody else. He took the responsibility. He just took it in the kind of humor that he has. He paid his dues, and he got out, and he had to struggle a bit, but he got back on his feet.
What did he tell you about his time in jail? What was it like for him?
Well, it was a federal prison in Texarkana. He was sentenced to 5 years, and with the good time that comes with these kinds of places, he ended up serving 2.5 years, and then a little bit of time in a halfway house in Baton Rouge. But it was just tedium. Here's a guy with one of the great athletes of his generation who was out with a lawnmower and doing gardening and stuff. But he, as he always did, he managed to make friends, and one of his friends had a wife and family nearby who would drop him groceries. They weren't supposed to eat anything but the prison food, but this friend of Billy's had a wife who would drop off the groceries, and they would sneak out and get them. And they took turns going out, and it was Billy's turn to go out, and he got caught. And he said, "Doggone it, I've been," he said, "possession of roast beef with intent to distribute."
What a great sense of humor. So, one of the things in your book that I read was that, when he got out of jail, he didn't sulk, he didn't whine, he knew what he did, and he paid the price. He didn't go around saying, "Everybody poor me," and as you had just alluded to, he struggled a little bit, but you know what? His family was still there for him, and in an ironic twist, he actually went to work for the prison system. How did that come about?
It was really it was one of those circumstances, one of those coincidences that turned out, as you say, to be really an irony. He needed work. He couldn't get his practice going back. People were cold shouldering him, and the dentist in town had decided that they weren't going to support him and send him any clients, any patients. And so he needed work, and he got through to the governor of Louisiana through the governor's brother, and there was a position open at Angola Prison. And what a step down, but it was a job. And as soon as he got there, of course, everybody knew Billy Cannon. The warden was just another fan, and the warden knew how talented he was, not just as a football player, but as a man. And the warden was undersuited at the federal suit at the time about the medical conditions, and he put Billy to work in reforming the whole medical department, which Billy did. And within a couple of years, they were out from under the suit, and Billy Cannon was turned from football player to prisoner to prison reformer.
Why is there such a love affair with Billy Cannon, and what did he mean to LSU and the community? Is it all because he's a local star make good, a local boy makes good? Why is there such a love affair with Billy Cannon?
It's very interesting to me, Warren. I wanted to plumb the depths of the man and try to figure that out. I think one of the reasons is he put LSU football on the map. LSU football has never been the same since that 1958 championship team. It put them into the big league, so to speak. And what is just another Saturday night before Billy Cannon became a social ritual for the whole town. If you've never been to a football game here at Tiger Stadium, you need to come up and go. It's really an amazing event. But Billy Cannon is just associated with LSU football in a way that nobody else seems to be.
But the love affair with Billy Cannon is also due to his extraordinary gifts as an athlete. Remember, Cannon was not only a great football player, but he excelled as a track athlete as well. And as Jim Weathersby explains, Cannon was the complete package.
Well, he had a physical stature and ability that very few people had in that day and age. I mean, he had world-class speed. He had incredible power He was quick and agile, and like I said, could turn and cut on a dime. He could throw the ball, he could catch the ball, he could block, he could kick, he could do anything on a football field. But probably what set him above everybody else was his mental toughness. I mean, he always had a great work ethic that was instilled in him by his family at an early age. And he would set out, in the off season, working hard with the weights, doing anything to improve. And he was determined to win. I mean, the man was a winner. He had this special aura about him, kind of like Michael Jordan in basketball. You just knew something special was going to happen when Billy Cannon was on that football field. And yeah, that was back in the late 50s and in the pros, in the 60s. And in this day and age, people probably have forgotten him. But he was arguably the best football player of his era. And, it is a shame that Father Time kind of erases the memories of a lot of people. But Billy Cannon was something special. And LSU remembers that, and the fans, and he's honored almost seemingly like every year when he goes back to the school there. And, his old high school is Struma High, in Baton Rouge. They think highly of him. And, I think Al Davis had a great relationship with him. It's probably all up until his death a few years ago. So he's well respected. I mean, he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but, it wouldn't surprise me. One day he gets elected. So he was a special athlete, and of course he's still alive today. I don't want to put him in his grave before his time, but he was spectacular at LSU. Everybody was trying to get him. Bear Bryant, Johnny Vaught, the great programs of the day, they wanted Billy Cannon, but when it all came to sign, he signed with the hometown LSU Tigers, and probably one of the greatest decisions he ever made. But yeah, it was his physical abilities and his mental abilities that just made him something special. And all the accolades he got over the years were well deserved. And there may not be another player like with Billy Cannon's abilities. So he's a great one.
Billy Cannon still lives down in the Baton Rouge area, and as you might expect, he and deGravelles became quite friendly. And the one thing deGravelles noted is that despite everything that has happened, the good and the not so good, Cannon is a pretty down-to-earth guy who just loves life.
He is, I'm happy to tell you, one of my best friends. We just developed a really good relationship from having written the book and then having spent a lot of time on the road selling it. He is charming. He is witty. He is just a nice guy. And, people would just get angry having to wait so long to get him to sign the book. But after a couple of minutes talking to him, they walked off on cloud nine. He could just charm the socks off of you.
Well, if anybody out there wants to read a great book, they've got to order your book. Go to Amazon to order it. Stop in your local Barnes & Noble. Billy Cannon, A Long, Long Run. Charles, thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. It's been terrific.
It was a pleasure, Warren. Great questions, and I just really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks again to both of my guests, Charles deGravelles, the author of the terrific biography on Billy Cannon, A Long, Long Run. You could go to any local Barnes & Noble and pick up a copy or order it off of Amazon.com. And Jim Weathersby from the SportsHistorian.com. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. To learn how you can be a part of Sports Forgotten Heroes, please visit patreon.com/sportsfh. That's patreon.com/sportsfh. You could even find out how to ask a question on a future podcast. Again, that's patreon.com/sportsfh. You can also find out more about Sports Forgotten Heroes at sportsfh.com or sportsforgottenheroes.com. You can follow us on Twitter at SportsFHeroes and on Facebook as well. Next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes, the incredible story of Bill Barilka. Thanks again, and see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.